Welcome, Angela. Thank you for joining us today. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and about Illuminate?
I've been working as a freelance composer for about the last 13 years, and I have a large catalogue of works at this point of almost 130 works, ranging from solo, chamber, orchestral works, concertos, and later this year I'll actually be embarking on my first full-length opera, which is exciting. And with Illuminate, or what I now call Illuminate Women's Music more often, it's a project I first sort of thought up in 2017 and then launched properly in 2018. And this was a time when I was still doing my PhD in composition, and I was really struggling to find composers that really spoke to me and my interest in mapping the natural world into my music. And then I began to come across composers such as Arlene Sierra, Emily Doolittle, Judith Weir, Jennifer Higdon, Charlotte Bray, and others. These composers actually spoke to me, and then it was this self-discovery that I realised that I hadn't really been introduced to any music by women, and somehow I'd got through to PhD level and not being introduced to any music by women for my whole education. When I look back at school through my ABRSM exams, I hadn't sort of registered, and through my undergrad years, again, no women composers in any of the modules. So I sort of just quite crudely began to write a list of women composers and their works, and sort of creating my own sense of like a personal canon of female composers. And I was also realizing whenever I was at a composition course or a conference to do with composition, I was either the only female composer there or perhaps one of two. And so I sort of began to think, this feels very strange. This isn't right. So um, I actually went to the first international conference on women's work in music in Bangor back in 2017, which was run by Rhiannon Mathias, where I learnt about a number of historical works by female composers who, again, I hadn't been aware of previously, such as Maud Owen, Rebecca Clark, Lily Boulanger, who seem like, well, to me now feel like really obvious names, but at the time they weren't. And at that conference, I presented a paper that sort of began to solidify the sort of underpinnings and the ideology that sort of formed Illuminate, called Invisible Canons Towards a Personal Canon of Female Composers. So it was after I presented this paper, someone asked me, so how are we going to fix this? And I suddenly just sort of said, well, I'm going to organise a concert of works with all women composers where the women can be the norm for once. So that's sort of where it all began, that I decided I was going to plan just one concert. I went on, to develop Illuminate Women's Music.
Thank you so much for that, Angela. I think you've already answered this a bit, but could you tell us what your vision is now for Illuminate or Illuminate Women's Music?
After that, I really sort of solidified what I wanted Illuminate to be. And when I'm not always doing these like pre-concert talks about Illuminate, I say it's a space to highlight the creativity of women, both as composers and performers, and to demonstrate there's a rich legacy of historical works written by women. And I suppose my Illuminate project, or Illuminate Women's Music project, has lots of sort of different missions within it. Sort of on one hand, it's to educate both audiences and performers and the composers I commission about the historical composers, and for the performers, of course, to educate them also about the living composers as well. And that's through the concerts, but also through the blog series I run on the website, and also through the digital legacy of recordings of the concert works that we have, which is obviously built up over the years. And then, particularly as I am a composer, to provide the composers with not just a world premiere performance. This is such a problem for living composers generally. And so I sort of always would have about 5 or 6 concerts per season, and obviously with the same performers as well, which is such a sort of unique privilege to be able to hear that work go beyond just that kind of that first performance. I've had the privilege of several seasons of now not just seeing my own works, but other people's works go on this wonderful journey. And by the fifth concert or sixth concert, the performers sort of know it at such a deeper level. That also sort of tapped back into my thinking about of how I can get works into the canon. They need to have repeat performances. They need to be really embedded in a performer's repertoire so that they would go on after the residents with Illuminate to perform them in their normal concerts, surrounded by male composers as well. And that then there would be also a good digital copy of that piece, which would allow composers to perhaps gain interest from other performers to go forward. So really to create as much of a situation as possible for the works to have a legacy going forward in some way. And not just with the commission works, but with any of the historical works that we did as well. And then I suppose something I always called like a mini mission within Illuminate was also providing opportunities to different backgrounds of composers. I myself from a state school educated background from the East Midlands. And I'm always aware that the industry has such a huge problem with class and people don't recognise their own privilege. I'm also quite conscious to make sure there's both, different educational backgrounds in the composers I commission and sort of geographical reach, because, there's such a kind of slant on everyone needs to be in London or has to be from London. And so I sort of try and fight against these other things a little bit within the project. And sort of linked to that is, of course, actually having the concerts nicely spread across the country.
Could you tell us a bit about your approach to programming with Illuminate, and particularly how you ensure a good balance between performing historic women composers and promoting living ones?
So it's always sort of a balance between showcasing the historical legacy of women's creativity and the ongoing practice of today. And I think both are important. I think it depends on it to an extent who the performers are. So I always have to consider practical things, whether there's actually repertoire that exists for a certain ensemble. And then if there isn't, how easily is it for me to adapt some existing historical repertoire? Are those works easily accessible regarding the sheet music? And all of these things kind of impact on whether I can actually program certain historical works. But I'm always sort of slightly adapting the programming depending on the audience we have, because I want to ensure that the concerts are accessible to a wide range of audiences. And so if I know it's a kind of audience that's sort of more used to the canon of classical works, then I might sort of try and program a few more historical works that, though they haven't heard before, are perhaps a more familiar sound world to them. And I'll sometimes do like a contemporary music sandwich, essentially, where it's sort of, a couple of contemporary works in between two historical works. I try and have as much as I can, have a dialogue with the performers as well, because at the end of the day, they've got to be the ones happy enough to perform it all.
So Illuminate has been going now since 2017. Could you tell us a bit about how you've ensured the financial sustainability of the project?
So it's still very much on a kind of project by project basis. And so it's just down to every year, unfortunately, doing a slog of grant applications. How I set it up in the first place is I had a group of people who were willing to do it sort of in kind, in a sense. And I said, I'll try to get as much funding as I can. And I remember that year we got money from the Henriksen Foundation, Gemma Classical Music Trust, and I think the Vaughan Williams Foundation as well. And it was enough for me to pay everyone apart from myself, basically. But what I wanted to do is prove the model worked, so that the following year we went to Arts Council England, and then I was able to get much more funding. And so it's gone on. It was tricky the year after COVID. I didn't actually bother to apply to Arts Council England, but since then, I've managed to sort of garner more funding. Actually, we went up to Scotland this year, so we actually got funding from Creative Scotland, as well as the Marcus Trust and the Vaughan Williams Foundation. And so, it's sort of back to actually being able to fund everyone, including myself, and travel and all the rest of it.
Thank you very much for sharing that, Angela. And the final question I'd like to ask you, please, is how do you approach building new audiences for women's music through your work with Illuminate?
One of the things I do is do a blog series to try and sort of build audiences' curiosity so they can learn about composers. It's really sort of working with the concert series and different venues and promoters that we go to. So usually I'm slotting into some existing concert series that already have an audience, and then they become our audience. Also, I've had sort of other organisations help us promote things. So when I was doing a concert in Birmingham, BCMG were very happy to sort of share our concert information with their audience, and then that really allowed us to have a really strong sort of reach to Birmingham audiences. And I think the other thing, which is sort of perhaps not so specifically related but is related, is that I always think audiences are underestimated, and that they can actually be quite curious about music, and sometimes we don't have enough faith and trust in audiences that they're happy to actually hear new music, whether that's new music that's actually old music but they've not heard it before, or actually new music. And those concert series that actually embrace that, I've found that their audiences have really loved our concerts. Whereas I have had people say, "Oh no, we can't take a risk on this," and which has been quite frustrating over the years. So yeah, I mean, it's just sort of this thing of building gradually our mailing list up through the sort of different concert series and universities we've gone to, and then I suppose that's built a trust in the brand.
Thank you very much, Angela, for joining us and for sharing your work with Illuminate.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
If you enjoyed this clip, feel free to follow the links on screen for more interesting articles and free courses from the Open University.